Hi, my name is Elena Štefancová. I'm a doctoral student here, and my presentation is about trustworthy recommender systems. Since I'm in my, I think, fourth year of the studies, I guess many of you already saw the presentation, and at first I wanted to ask, like, who already saw me presenting about recommender systems? Okay, so it's like half and half. So I'm gonna go through the introduction a little bit again, but I'm gonna speed it a bit up. But we can come to that later. Somebody has a question. So, as I mentioned, the field of my studies is recommender system. So, what is a recommender system? Usually, it's the output of recommender system is a list of items which we want to recommend to a user. So, it's a tool of personalization. And usually the inputs to this system are some user interactions, so some information about user and some information about the items we want to recommend. And in general, the motivation for the recommendations are to increase the sale, increase the customer satisfaction, and other similar motivations. And these results, the items we want to recommend, is usually a list where the items on the top are the items with the highest priority, and the items at the bottom are the least priority. So probably the least interested for the user. And this data we are using for recommendation can be either transactions or some explicit user preferences. So it's used in many different domains, like entertainment, e-commerce, or services. Some of the well-known applications are if you use any social network like Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, anything. This mighty algorithm you maybe heard about being behind it, that's recommender systems. And it's also used in e-commerce for most of the e-shops. So if you ever used Amazon, Alza, or almost any bigger e-shop. There are different types of recommender systems. The one I'm gonna talk most about is collaborative recommender systems, which is where you take users with similar interests or similar items, and based on that similarity, you are trying to predict what is going to be interested next. So if you have two users who have similar interactions in the past, when one of them liked something in the past, there is a high probability that the second one is going to also like it. And we can do this memory-based, so user-based or item-based, but this can be also based with some machine learning techniques or matrix factorization based on the matrix of users and items. There are also other types of recommender systems. You can base it on content-based filtering, so based on the user or item features, the demographic recommender systems. There are also knowledge-based recommender systems, which are maybe some of you use ChatGPT or some other LLM models for oh, I like this movie, recommend me something similar, or I bought this in the past, recommend me something. So that's a knowledge-based recommender system. And then there are also hybrid systems, which are a combination of different approaches. So I'm actually, most of my research is connected to this hybrid system, which, and also to this special type of recommender systems, which is where you don't only take into account the accuracy-based metric. So you are not just gonna try to predict the highest score of something, but you take some extra conditions into account. So for example, it can be some diversity, or sometimes you want to make a group recommendation, so you have to balance somehow the opinions in the group, and so on. You can do this in many different ways. The three most basic, this is like the most basic division, how to take this extra information into account, is either to pre-filter the data, so you only take the data which are connected to your use case and then train different models for each of the criterion. Then you can use it within the system. So during the modeling, you put in some extra features, and you can also do it through post-filtering and using this like hybrid recommender system architecture, where you take one recommender system and then take the results of it, so this like already ranked list or like scores of the items, and then re-rank it again based on another criterion. So I already mentioned that you can do this if you want to, for example, work on some other metrics, not just the accuracy based. So some of these metrics can be, you want to make the recommendation more novel, you want to use bigger portion of your portfolio, or you want to make the coverage higher, all this, or make it more diverse. And I look more into how to make it more trustworthy and more fair. Some issues you can solve this kind of approaches is that recommender systems are prone to some specific issues within the recommender systems, which is, for example, cold start, when you miss some information in the beginning to make the basic recommendation. Or in our case, you have bias in the data that, for example, some groups of the user can be discriminated, or some groups of the providers who are providing the items, because not every time when you are recommending something, you are also kind of like the owner of the items. So, for example, you have Netflix, which recommends movies, but Netflix doesn't produce all of the movies they have in their portfolio. You have some movies which they just bought from other sources. So you want to mitigate this bias, or fight filter bubbles within the recommendation. Or now the biggest part of my research is connected to fairness-aware recommendation. And this fairness, it's kind of also making recommendation more diverse. And recommender systems are very prone to long tail issue, which means that a very small group, usually through the popularity bias, the small group of items is way more prevalent in the recommendation than the rest of the items. So maybe you heard of this like parity rule when you have like 20% and 80%, so this kind of issue. And actually incorporating fairness also helps with this issue. Other motivation to look more into trustworthy and fairness-aware recommendation is that now there is this push towards more ethical AI, and recommender system is also one of the topics of interest of AI Act, which actually names recommender systems of certain number of users as like a dangerous system. So more about trustworthy recommender system. So what does it mean that the system is trustworthy? So there are some general opinions how a trustworthy AI or trustworthy recommender should look like, what aspects should it involve. For example, it should be robust. Of course, there should be some privacy and security issues should be handled. It should also have some transparency for the user. The results should be somehow explainable, and also fairness is one of the aspects. And all of this should be involved with all of the steps of the system. So the data should be the preparation should be robust and secure. Also, the model should be robust and explainable. And this goes to the evaluation. So also the evaluation should be done, like both like the technical evaluation, but there should be also this aspect of ethical evaluation. Another aspect of trustworthy systems next to fairness is explainability. So the motivation for explainability is to have the system to justify, control, and also make informed decision. I'm not gonna talk too much about this because I feel there is a lot of other works and a lot of you in this group who already have their own presentation about explainability. But some of the pros of having also explainable system is that if you have system which is explainable, there is it involves also the reduced cost of mistake and mitigating errors. So it does not only have like the ethical pros, but also the financial pros. Just some overview, the types of model for from the explainability point of view is that there are white box model, which you can explain just the basic model on its own. Then you have the black box model, where you basically can explain the model. You can just like look at the model and try to somehow appropriate or like kind of like guess how the model works, but you never really see into the model. And then there is gray box models, which is intersection between these two. And from the recommendation point, the explainability is a little bit specific, because if you want to explain the results to the user, one of the easiest approaches is to basically do it from a comparative way, either from like user base, so other users with similar taste like this. So this was also recommended to you, which is very common within the collaborative models, or the same through item-based approach, or look into the features. So say like, okay, this item has this feature, this item has this feature, so it's somehow similar. But also from the social point of view. So one of the social approaches can be 5 of your friends bought this, so the probability you are gonna like this also high. And you also have to somehow evaluate the explainability. So this can be done through the user study, either online or offline. And some of the important metrics within the explainable recommender systems are that you should not only evaluate the goodness of the explanation, but also the satisfaction of the users. I already mentioned that there is this important comparative aspect of the explainable recommendations. And this can be also done from a point of view that you take 2 different items and you can say like, okay, this item is lower next to this one because of, and put in the reason. Just a little bit more about fairness. So there is one extra aspect in the fairness, and that's multi-stakeholder fairness. So recommender systems are a little bit specific in this like multi-stakeholder aspect, that, as I mentioned, you have these providers who are providing the items, then also the consumers, the people who are basically using the items. And then you also have somebody who is providing the platform. And this specific issue brings these multi-stakeholder challenges. So basically, you want to have all of the stakeholders feeling that the system is treating them fairly. So if I'm somebody who is providing the items, I also want to feel that my items are used and they have this like kind of chance of being recommended. And to incorporate fairness, it can be either done from the static point, which is usually the one approach which is used the most, where you take the set of the items and maybe you try to diversify at the beginning. So if you pre-process the recommendations and then just show the recommendation to the user when they log in, which you usually do a couple of times of day. It's not done like every second of the day, but a couple of times. This like static approach, but then you can't really know, like maybe the diversified items, maybe some of them were shown to the users who connected that day, maybe some of them were not. So it's not very balanced. There is also the dynamic approach, which is not very used and not very researched yet, where you try to do this like basically the moment the users log in into the system. So that's the dynamic aspect of this fairness, that you don't do it like statically, like for example, for a newsletter or pre-counted results ahead, but you do it the moment the user logs into the system. And some of the challenges within this also for mainly for the dynamic fairness system, like all of the fairness system have issues that you don't have a lot of data sets you can use, but within the dynamic approach, it's even more prevalent. So some of the solutions I've been working on is one of them is the system which can allow this dynamic approach towards the fairness. And also another project I've been working on is synthetic data generation, which allows experiments with dynamic fairness. So just a little bit about the synthetic data generation. There are issues within, because it's mostly like user data, it's a lot of privacy issues, and it's very hard to get public data sets and also to use them without like compromising the privacy of the users. And they've been some approaches, like some is heuristic, so you just like set some heuristic and generate the data based on that. Also learning from a data source, basically using a matrix factorization model and then autoencoders to generate new user vectors. Or there is also data obfuscation, where you basically blur the real data. You take a data set and then you try to make it basically for the users to not be able to identify them later. So I mentioned I've been working on projects which are focused on these topics. One of the projects is synthetic data generation, where we basically what we try to do is we try to generate this data, which are then used for the fairness-aware experiments, fairness-aware recommender experiments. And basically, we are not generating the data, I mean like the user data and the item data, but since a lot of recommender systems are using matrix factorization, the basic idea behind this is to generate the matrices from which are like the byproduct of the matrix factorization. So first we generate the user matrix, then the items, and then we compute the latent factors for users, for items, and create the to compute the latent factors. And then it's also like now, like I've been working with this method for, I think like 2 years now, or 3 years. And basically, we've been adding features one by one. So now you can also inject some bias into the data, or you can make the data similar to a real world data set based on some input you will provide to the input based on the distribution on the real world data set. So, for example, this is a histogram of the data. One is the synthetic data, and the other one is movie lens, which we needed for some fairness-aware experiments. And you can see that, for example, the histogram of recommendation, which is basically how many items, how many times were recommended, and so on, was very similar to the real-world data, and that allowed us to make experiments we wanted to do, even though the real-world data didn't have all of the features we would need for that. Huh? That's not zero. That's like the number of items and how many times they've been recommended. So this is the long tail I mentioned before, which is, we basically needed it because it's very relevant in the real world data. So this is the synthetic, this is the real world. And we needed the same issues which have the real world data to have in the synthetic data, so we can test our hypothesis. Because it wasn't, basically that's the issue, that we couldn't, we had some ideas what we want to look into, but the real world data sets, which is usually this movie lens, which is movies, or Ember, which is music, and some other data sets we've been using. Sometimes they're just like, for example, if we want to test the dynamic approach, so like users coming one by one, it's not so easy because they don't have timestamp. So we need to simulate it somehow, and then that's why we are using this synthetic data. These were more just to use that, like, we can modify, or we can generate the data for the experiments we need. As I already mentioned, there is this issue with the fairness within recommender system that is very, like, there is multiple aspects you can look into it. So you have the different stakeholders, and you have this like consumer side, provider side. You can also have like the individual fairness or group fairness. So for example, individual fairness is that, oh, okay, do we want to be fair to like all of the items individually, or do we want to be fair from the group perspective? So if we have a group of, I don't know, these are items of one producer and different producer, so provider, how do we want to approach this fairness? And there's basically, I'm saying infinite, but there is at least like 200 different metrics for fairness I saw. So the idea we've been working on is not how to use like one metric or like one approach, but more how to use these different approaches, or like utilize these different approaches for fairness from at the same time. So this can be just like the basic division. So you can see that you have like the fairness types, and you have like a lot of metrics in these quadrants. But the basic division we are using now is the individual, group, and then from like the providers and from the consumer side. And to test these different, include these different fairness aspects, we have this system which we call SCRAF-D. The D is for dynamic. I've been mentioning dynamic fairness so many times, where basically the user arrives the basic recommendations are generated for him. But then these basic accuracy-based metrics are not the final recommendation, but there is another system which is used. We call them agents, but it's not agents in this like LLM or generative AI approach. It's the agents, which each of the agent is basically representing different like fairness approach, so different fairness metric. And this agent has different sides within him, different interests. One of them is it has this fairness metric, but also the compatibility metric. So it can evaluate how the items which are recommended for the users are compatible for the user. And then based on this, when the agency like, okay, there is a, like my metric, I'm following some fairness metric and the metric is yet not fulfilled. And there is this user who is compatible with my interests, like my items could be interested for him. And also I'm lacking this fairness at the moment. I, as the agent, want to be involved in the decision what to recommend. And there can be like multiple agents. And the first step of the system is basically to allocate which agents are going to be involved with this decision. And then there is another step where you take the original recommendations, so the one which is accuracy-based, and these fairness-aware agents, and together they vote through like social choice mechanisms. And the results of the final voting, the final re-ranking of the original accuracy-based list is the final recommended list. So these are some results. This is for the group fairness and from the provider side. And you can see that like this is the baseline of the data, which is on the y-axis. You can see the accuracy, and here is the fairness metric. And you can see that the baseline is actually for some of these approaches, because we've been testing multiple like allocation mechanism and multiple social choice, the voting part. And you can see that some of them are actually performing better than the baseline. So involving the fairness within the system doesn't mean that the results, like the accuracy-based results, are going to be worse. Like sometimes, for example, the users, you can recommend them the most like popular options, but that doesn't mean that some other less popular option would be like less interested for them. So I already mentioned there is this like provider side and the consumer side, the individual and the group. So our first experiments were within this provider and group fairness. And I already mentioned these results a couple of times before. I presented at the colloquium because this was the first paper. And basically the basic result, the most basic knowledge out of this paper was that involving this kind of fairness can even make the results better, and it's possible to involve like multiple different fairness aspects as one through the system. Then another work we did was balancing group and individual fairness. So in this case, some of the agents were representing the individual fairness, and we took this new metric, which is called coverage, where we took the unique items in the list and compared them to the total, like the set of the total items. And we've been basically both evaluating the group fairness and the individual fairness. And the outcome of this paper was that both of them can improve together, but also that just using the individual fairness metric is not always guaranteeing that the group fairness is going to be achieved also. So then there is another approach we've been trying to, but we only started with this, and that's how this system, which we already tested for the group fairness, individual fairness, for provider fairness, and now there are also some experiments for consumer fairness. But we wanted to test more the dynamic fairness, so how the systems change when the users come one by one, or there are some concept drifts, so the interest of the user basically switched within a very short period of time. This can happen with like trends, with like social media, but also within the newspapers and so on. And this is something I basically started to do very recently, and that's also using the synthetic data. And some preliminary results from these experiments, which I mentioned. So the first paper was about the what I mentioned, looking into the group fairness from the provider side. So basically the first experiment to use this CraftD. Then the second paper was actually a longer version of this as a journal article. Then we looked more into this this individual versus group fairness, which is the third paper. Then also we looked more into the synthetic data, which is the fourth paper. And the fifth one is very recent, which looked into this integrating individual and group fairness for recommender system, which looked even deeper to like individual versus group fairness, like whether the individual fairness can also achieve the group fairness. And now at the moment, as I mentioned, I've been working more on the dynamic aspects, but we don't really have yet results there. And another issue we've been looking into is to how to interpret these recommender system results. So I've been thinking about using some knowledge representation methods for that. So since some of the, like the basic algorithm within this system can be almost anything, we thought about using maybe some score decomposition to take the baseline and then the fairness, and through argumentation-based explanation, use some pro-arguments and con-arguments to justify these changes in the results. And this is the last slide. And that's why I also mentioned the comparative fairness so many times, because that's probably how we are going to use it to explain why the accuracy-based items were pushed lower and the fairness aware items were pushed higher. So just to summarize it, there is the method for the synthetic data generation for the fairness-aware recommendation. We've been adding some features as we go, like based what experiments we do at the moment. Then within the fairness, there is still the dynamic fairness approach, and also looking into fairness-aware recommendation more from the, not just from the provider side, but also from the consumer side, and probably making these changes in the recommendation to explain them to the users. So thank you for your attention, and it's my work.